the agenda?
Yes.
Great. So what I'd like to do, there's a number of areas that we'll be covering tonight, some important concepts that really cut across all of the government benefit programs. We'll be speaking primarily of some federal lifeline benefits together with some state benefits. But there are some key concepts that I think are important to review throughout all of your experience in dealing with government benefits. We'll be going over the Supplemental Security Income Program that was started in the 1970s and what that is and how one can be become eligible for it. We'll deal with Medicaid, and there are so many permutations with regard to MassHealth and Medicaid. Medicaid is the federal term for MassHealth. So if you go to other states, you might hear the term Medicaid, or in California it's called Medi-Cal, but in Massachusetts we call Medicaid MassHealth. There are a number of different programs out there depending on categorical eligibility, age, but I'll be dealing specifically because we're doing this for the ARC of Massachusetts as a transitional focus. We'll be looking primarily at MassHealth as it relates to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities as they're turning 18. We'll also be talking about Social Security, disability income, and DAC benefits, so those are things that you need to know about, maybe not now, but perhaps in the future when you're looking at potential disability income when a parent either dies, retires, or becomes disabled and starts collecting from their own Social Security. Also Medicare, most people think, well, Medicare is for people who are 65 years of age or older, but Medicare actually is an option for individuals who have disabilities and whose parents are receiving Social Security. I'll cover the MassHealth program for adult foster care very briefly, but we'll talk about some of those issues that I think most people really need to know. We'll dabble a little bit with Section 8 and understand what that is. It's a housing subsidy. And we'll also be looking at the eligibility criteria for the Department of Developmental Services. So perhaps we can go to the next slide, please. Important key concepts in dealing with government benefits. I've been practicing law for close to 30 years, and prior to that I worked in the field of disability services 10 years prior to that. And one of the things that I've seen over the years is that there are lots of sort of confusing and contradictory and overlapping benefits. So just understand as you get into government benefits, it is a maze of eligibility guidelines. It starts often at the federal level. There are then state laws and also regulations. It's very dense. I think it's really important to understand that there are some traps out there. The system, particularly at Social Security Administration and times MassHealth, the workers are inconsistent. Many of them, is choppy in terms of their competence levels. Sometimes you'll find some really solid people, and other times they will be telling you things that are frankly wrong. Not an adversarial process, not necessarily with regard to the folks you'll be dealing with as Social Security or MassHealth, but it's also collaborative either. And so it really is incumbent on folks to really become educated and know where the sources of the law are, or at least know where to find them. And I have found that in many circles there's lots of half-truths, okay? So as we go through this, you must analyze each program individually. There are very, very big differences between, obviously, SSI, SSDI, and DAC benefits. There's different MassHealth programs. There's about 5 or 6 health insurance programs that MassHealth offers, and then there are these waiver programs that are administered for particular populations. So it's important to really understand each one of those For some reason, I've lost my my desktop. So I'm going to hope that other people are seeing this, because I've just apparently the system has logged me up.
Okay.
So
how about?
I'm sorry.
I
don't have
made
in
you.
front of
I just made you the presenter, so that let me.
It says thanks for
take
using
it over.
WebEx.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. We'll get this going.
Should I come back in?
Yes.
Okay. I will join again.
Okay, viewing. Okay, we don't want to view your desktop. We want to view my desktop. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. Registration ID 180531.
Okay, do you see it again?
I can see it again, yes.
Okay, good.
There will be categorical eligibility, and that relates to the functional need of the individual or attribute of the applicant. It might be a disability, age. So
Fred, we're having. You're kind of garbled. We're having a hard time hearing you. Okay, I think you're back now.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Okay, good.
Okay. So I was on speaker. So categorical eligibility relates to the functional need or attribute of the applicant. Many of these also have financial eligibility. So they're what's called means-tested or welfare-based programs. And there are income and resource rules relating to each one of these types of programs. There are, however, multiple exceptions, which we'll try to get into. We're hitting sort of the tippy top of many of these, but I'll try to go over the major exceptions for financial eligibility. And when you're looking at financial eligibility, we're looking both at income as well as resources. Okay? Could we go to the next slide, please? So as we get into the next slide, we will be looking at the Supplemental Security Income Program. And the Supplemental Security Income Program, I'm just going to continue to talk because we've got a lot of information to go forward with, and I'll just trust that the presentation will catch up with us. The SSI program is a federal program for folks who have disabilities, folks who are 65 years of age or older, or who are blind, and who have low incomes and have a few assets. There is hopefully you'll be able to get a PowerPoint presentation following this, but you'll see that there is a URL that I've listed on the Supplemental Security Income page. And one of the things, here we go, the one thing that we want to look at is www.ssa.gov. For a government program, it is surprisingly user-friendly. So in order to be eligible for supplemental security income, the categorical eligibility is you have to prove a disability. So disability is not by virtue of a label. It's really a vocational definition that's unable to engage in what's called substantial gainful activity, and that's a term of art due to a medically determinable physical or mental impairment that's going to last for longer than 12 months or will result in death. Now, substantial gainful activity is unable to basically work, okay? And what Social Security normally does is if you are getting SSI, they will track you, through your Social Security number, your income through the Internal Revenue Service, and if you are shown to earn over a monthly basis, so those numbers that you see on the screen are a monthly earning. So in 2016, the SGA amount for somebody who is not blind is $1,130. For an individual who's blind, it's $1,820. So if you earn more than that, then Social Security Administration will make a presumption that you can work, that you can engage in substantial gainful activity. And as a result of that, they will remove your disability determination. So your eligibility will be lost as a result of earning more than that. A couple points that I want to make about financial eligibility is that for someone 18 who's younger than 18, the assets and income of the parents are deemed to the applicant. So it normally happens just as we do with respect to emancipation planning. We have a webinar coming up at the end of next month, I believe, on guardianship and autonomy and decision-making, that when you turn 18, you're deemed emancipated, and therefore you're no longer dependent upon your parents. So when an individual turns 18, it's only their income and it's only their assets that are considered for purposes of SSI eligibility. Under the deeming prior, we can click on again, and you'll see a resource limitation for, and there are income rules. So the resource limitation for SSI is $2,000 in resources, and a resource is defined as any asset that can be converted to cash within 30 days. Okay, so that's a very broad area. There are non-countable assets, or what's called exempt assets. These are household belongings, personal goods, personal items, and a car of any value. The income rules really are more complicated than what we need to talk about today, but in essence, if you have income of less than $733, you'll be able to get at least some SSI. The supplemental security income is a monthly payment. It actually comes in two hits. First is the federal contribution that hits around the first of the month, and then the state contribution follows thereafter. The monthly benefit really depends on your living arrangement. If you're living in the home of another, if you're living independently, there are different amounts. It also can change based on marital status, on your categorical eligibility, as well as your income. So earned income, you'll see, also reduces your SSI eligibility, your SSI payment. There are many folks that I work with who work in various jobs, yet they're not making the substantial gainful activity amount on monthly. You have to report that income, and then SSI applies deductions after giving some allowances for the earned income. That amount actually can vary based on the amount of earned income. The average, you can click on the next bullet, the average monthly payment for an adult ranging from the age of 18 to 64 with the disability on the federal is about $545.23, and then the state contribution. And these are national figures, and that's pretty much what you'll see in Massachusetts as well for February 2016. So that's the amount of the average SSI monthly income that you will be seeing from eligibility. Next slide, please. There are a couple selected issues I'd like to raise with regard to supplemental security income. The first is that child support is counted by SSA, by the Social Security Administration, as unearned income. So there can be a dollar-for-dollar reduction, even though the payment is coming into the custodial parent, and even though I said earlier that deeming is only available with respect to people over the age of 18, this is one of those traps, right, that I talked about right at the beginning, that child support is counted as unearned income. The other issue we see, well, before we go to the resources, what we do in child support is we can assign irrevocably the child support payments by going to court, filing a petition, and assigning those that income stream into a trust that meets the requirements of Section 1396P D4A of Title 42 of the Medicaid statute. And that's something that we do on a very regular basis, is that we create a trust that can be created by a parent, grandparent, guardian, or a court. It's irrevocable. Usually both parties assent to the petition, and we have the child support assigned over to the trust, and then we present those documents to SSA as part of the SSI application or as an attempt to modify the SSI payments, and SSI will then be modified, usually in an upward fashion, after that happens. Now, the other issue that often comes up is that people have over $2,000 in assets when they're turning 18. They may have been gifted, some money. There might be a uniform transfer to Minors Act account. So there are essentially three basic options. The first option that's under this, we can click on that bullet, is to gift. And that's not a very good option. It's a bad option. Looks like we're missing part of the thing, but with that, it doesn't say bad C. It's a bad option. There is a 3-year look-back period. So for somebody who's 18 and you're going to be gifting, you have to wait till 21. It's not a good option. Spending down, that's what we used to do prior to 1993 before we had some other federal law to help us. Spending down on non-countable assets. So you might be buying household items or personal care items, durable medical equipment, prepaying some services such as a phone bill or gym bill or vacations. A person can own a car and still be on SSI, and a car of any value, and also a home, but that often is not really practical because we're looking at a fairly small amount of money over the $2,000 limit. There are what I call Section 13, actually it should be 1396P. I had modified this, and apparently the revised version didn't get to the WebEx. The 1396P options first is a self-settled trust. That's the trust that can be created by a parent, grandparent, guardian, or a court, and you can transfer excess assets into the self-settled trust, and that will enable you to safeguard those assets and qualify any assets put over into that trust are not counted as towards the $2,000 resource limit. The pool trust, the plan of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, the Berkshire County Arc, the Bristol County Arc also has a pool trust. You can put money into those, and that will safeguard those assets, and those benefits can be paid out to a beneficiary, and the money in the trust will not be counted for purposes of the $2,000 limit. And finally is the ABLE account. We've all heard about the ABLE accounts. We can't set them up yet in Massachusetts. We're waiting for the legislation in the state to happen. But we anticipate that you will be able to put up to $14,000 a year in an ABLE account, which will grow tax-free, and as long as the distributions are qualified disability-related expenses out of the ABLE account, those are going to be tax-free to the recipient as well. There are payback provisions in all of these options, the self-settled trust, the pool trust, and the ABLE account. What I mean by that is that the actual beneficiary or owner, upon their death, upon the beneficiary or owner's death, the Medicaid gets a first bite at the apple to be repaid for benefits that it paid out to the beneficiary. So let's move on to Medicaid, also known as MassHealth. When SSI eligibility is established, that creates an automatic eligibility for MassHealth standard coverage. There's no separate application that has to be filed, and that's a good thing. Okay, there are other states where that has to be the case, but in Massachusetts we have automatic eligibility for MassHealth. MassHealth standard is secondary if there is private health insurance. So if a family has a child or an adult child on, MassHealth will pay for some deductibles and copays. You'll give to the doctor or the provider both cards, the Aetna card or the Fallon or the Blue Cross or Harvard card, as well as the MassHealth standard, and they'll do the billing. Also, it's secondary to Medicare. MassHealth standard is critical, and they can pay for a broad array of services. And I'll talk about the adult family care or adult foster care, and also pay for day habilitation and other services. Often people talk about Medicaid as being a gateway to adult services, so that's really key. Next is Social Security, disability income, and disabled adult child benefits. These are administered again through the Social Security Administration. And these payments there can be two different kinds. First is Social Security disability income, which is the second bullet. That's for someone who has worked and at some point in time are no longer able to engage in substantial gainful activity. So they'll get SSDI. And then there are DAC benefits, disabled adult child benefits, and these are payments to a child of a parent who's paid into Social Security, and this benefit begins when the parent retires, dies, or becomes disabled. And this requires that the disability have to occur and be established before the turning 22, which is a good thing if you've filed for SSI and they've already made the disability determination. Then that opens the door for the DAC benefit. Next slide, please. So these payments, the big difference between Social Security disability income and disabled adult child benefits from supplemental security income is that SSI is a welfare program. Remember those income limits and asset limits? The asset limits do not apply with regard to Social Security disability income or DAC benefits. The SSDI payments are based on the level of contributions made by the individual who is disabled, and the DAC benefits, disabled adult child benefits, are based on the primary insurance amount. Say, okay, so when can my son or daughter get DAC benefits? When you retire, or if you become disabled and start collecting, or retire and start collecting, or if upon your death, those benefits will accrue. So 50% of your primary insurance amount will be paid to your son or daughter upon retirement or disability. So, and then 75% of your primary insurance amount is paid upon the death of the parent. Next slide. And so there are some selected issues. First is because the PIA and the 50% and the 75% usually is much higher than the income limits of SSI, we often lose supplemental security income. Now, when that happens, sometimes there's a glitch in Medicaid or MassHealth, but it should not and must not result in the loss of MassHealth. And so there are two specific regulations that I cite here. And if you can click one more time, we can see the Pickle Amendment cases. And that's the site for the Pickle Amendment. And then the second is the Disabled Adult Child case. And unfortunately, it says MassHealth regulations. The revision actually had Disabled Adult Child in there. So the next slide is Medicare. Medicare is normally for a federal health insurance program. I think that's mostly for folks who are 65 years of age and older. However, individuals who get onto SSDI or who get onto the DAC benefit and they continue to be on that for 24 consecutive months are also entitled to Medicare. There's one very rare exception that if there's somebody who has chronic renal disease or has Lou Gehrig's disease, then the DAC, the disabled adult child, could get Medicare immediately. A couple selected issues. Again, the DAC recipient Medicare is the primary health insurance, is the first to pay, and MassHealth is the secondary insurance with respect to Medicare. I really want to raise a very important point on the second bullet, which is disability status needs to be maintained throughout receiving the period of time receiving disabled adult child benefits, Social Security, disability income benefits. If you go over that substantial gainful activity amount, you will lose your SSDI or your DAC benefit, and you'll also lose those health insurance benefits with regard to Medicare. Let's move on. The Adult Foster Care Program, also known as the Adult Family Care Program, is a MassHealth benefit. So if somebody is on SSI, they're already going to be getting MassHealth Standard. We've learned that already. And MassHealth will pay for an AFC plan of care for a MassHealth member. This allows family members to be paid to be adult family care providers in Massachusetts. Now, that we're rare in that many states don't allow for this. There is a provision in the waiver that's also been worked its way into the regulations that an AFC provider must not be legally responsible for the member. That means the guardian, or it can't be a parent of a minor member. But the AFC provider can be a parent or a sibling of a member who's over the age of 18. There's an assessment. It's really there's an assessment, the minimum data set evaluation that's used by the AFC agency that comes in is normally a clinical assessment. And you can be found eligible for 2 levels of care, looking at activities of daily living, looking at instrumental activities of daily living, also looking at need for supervision. And those 2 levels of care relate to the amount of compensation paid to the AFC provider, and the payments to the AFC provider are non-taxable. When someone is determined eligible for SSI, they automatically are going to be eligible to apply for a Section 8 housing subsidy. Now, the HUD program, the Section 8 program is administered through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Section 8 is a voucher that is awarded to an individual with a disability and can subsidize the private market rent obligations in a rental situation. It can be either in a project-based, in a housing authority managed setting, or it can be called tenant-based, which is through the Housing Choice Voucher Program in a private landlord setting. The way this works is that an individual who's fortunate enough to get a voucher, and I consider these things like gold. They are just absolutely wonderful when you get them. They're very hard to get. There's a long waiting list. But the individual pays approximately 30% of their recurrent monthly income, and the federal subsidy pays, and there's a misspelling here. It pays the landlord the balance according to established rental guidelines. So that's huge, right? So if somebody is getting $600 in income, all they'll have to pay for an $800 apartment would be 30% of their $600, which would be $180, and the federal government will pay that subsidy. Application can be made at the local housing authorities or in regional housing assistance programs. In my law practice, I represent lots of families who are planning their special needs plans, looking for the future. We've done a number of private housing situations with families, and we've used the Section 8 housing subsidy in the choice program, where a supplemental needs trust, first the parent and then a supplemental needs trust, can actually own a condo or own a home, and the voucher can pay the rent to the trust or to the parent. There's a provision in the HUD regulations that relate to providing a reasonable accommodation to voucher holders who have disability. And so the normal sort of arm's length transaction that you might expect in these types of programs are modified in order to afford families and individuals with disabilities to have permanent housing. I have to say there is a long waiting list for these, but there's no fee in when you pay for when you apply for this. So if you are inclined to think, well, maybe in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now you might want to have a subsidy, there's no disadvantage of applying now, and I would recommend that you apply now once your son or daughter turns 18. There is an imputed income from assets. So if you have, you can have $50,000 in the bank if you are a DAC and if you get a voucher. Okay, but they will, and you can have over the $2,000 limit. Again, remember, each, as I started in the first slide, each of these programs need to be looked at individually. And I know I'm throwing a lot out at you tonight, and I'm sorry for that, but we have 1 hour to cover a lot of really complex areas. But what happens is if you have $50,000 in the bank, they will impute income from that trust, that account balance, and that will increase your 30% rental obligation. There is a problem with regard to distributions from special needs trusts that can't count as income to the Section 8 tenant. So you really need to be careful in terms of it, both administering the special needs trust and also with respect to how you report income with these situations. Now, let's turn to the Department of Developmental Services, and then we can hopefully have some time for some questions. The Department of Developmental Services has 2 portals right now for eligibility. As you know, below the age, you may know, below the age of 18, the Department of Developmental Services serves children with developmental disabilities, and those conditions are broadly defined. When you get into the adult services at age 18, the first is a person with an intellectual disability. And that's a person who there's really 3 prongs that one needs to look at. One is significant limitations in intellectual functioning, and then also significant limitations in adaptive behavior as expressed in conceptual, social, practical, adaptive skills beginning before the age of 18. And so there's a 3-prong. Significant limitations in intellectual functioning, deficits in adaptive behavior, and all beginning in the developmental period. And these need to be consistent with the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. So we're looking at a person with an intellectual disability. When you apply to the Department of Developmental Services, an individual from DDS in the regional intake and eligibility unit will review these the testing. They'll want to look at all the testing. It'll be reviewed by the regional psychologist, and they'll make a determination as to whether or not an individual has an intellectual disability. There is also, within the last couple of years, a new portal or a new entry, new door, if you will, that's a person with a developmental disability. And so an individual who has a developmental disability is someone who has a diagnosis has an impairment, mental or physical impairment, resulting from an intellectual disability, autism, Smith-Magenis syndrome, or Prader-Willi syndrome. So there may be many people who are on the phone now or attending this webinar say, you know, there are a number of other conditions that would constitute a developmental disability under the federal statute, and you would be right. But under the state statute, the Department of Developmental Services in the Commonwealth has defined an adult person with a developmental disability for purposes of eligibility for the Department of Developmental Services to be limited to a person with an intellectual disability, someone who is on the spectrum, autism, Smith-Magenis syndrome, or Prader-Willi, and these conditions have to be manifested before the age of 22. So remember in the first slide I said there's all these different overlapping issues and programs and different categorical eligibility requirements. Well, here we see with the Department of Developmental Services, a person with an intellectual disability needs to demonstrate that the disability began prior to the age of 18. And a person with a developmental disability, autism, Smith-Magenis syndrome, and Prader-Willi, beginning before the age of 22. Okay, so once you're found eligible, then the Department of Developmental Services will administer something called the MASCAP. And the MASCAP is really made of three specific parts. First is the ICAP, and I believe that's called the Inventory of Community and Agency Planning. What this is a questionnaire, basically an assessment that's done by the intake and eligibility coordinator, a person who's meeting with the family around the time of the application, and they'll be looking at activities of daily living, and they'll be looking at what level of support is needed in order to perform various activities of daily living. And the ICAP renders a service score. So you can score anywhere from 0 to 100 on an ICAP. And depending on how the individual is able to perform various activities of daily living. The reason I say that the service score is important because prioritization, well, first, adult services, as hopefully everyone knows, there's no entitlement to adult services. You can't dictate, yeah, I want X, Y, and Z service, gimme. I mean, there's no entitlement to adult services. It's all based on a triage. It's all based on who can demonstrate the most need for services. And we're looking at residential for prioritization, and we're looking at day services. So there are two areas that you'll get priority for residential and priority for day. For an ICAP score of a certain number, it's 40 or below, there's going to be the sense that you're going to need 24/7, you're going to need intensive residential support. Over that, they will look at various other factors relative to the individual's ability to stay safe, to perform skills. The second prong of prioritization is the community caregiver assessment. Here, they're not looking at the individual, the individual's need for services and supports. They're looking at the community, the family's ability to maintain that person in a safe environment. And that's really what the Commonwealth's obligation is to help people stay safe. Obviously, you want to help folks, develop their potential, but these are scarce resources that are available. And so they're looking at, is this a one-person, single-family, a one-parent situation or a two-parent situation? What are the ages of the parents? Are there other individuals with disabilities in the family? Are there extenuating circumstances that renders the individual with a disability unsafe, or are there other factors that need to be accounted for? And that's where the clinical judgment that's used by the Department of Developmental Services professionals will evaluate both the ICAP as well as the community caregiver assessment. You can go to the Department of Developmental Services website and download the MASCAP manual. It's very dense. It's really fascinating reading. But you can download it and really get a sense of how this operates and the complexity, frankly, that is really runs through this entire process. Eligibility as well as prioritization is subject to procedural due process. So there are opportunities to appeal both eligibility determinations if people believe that their son or daughter has an intellectual disability or has a developmental disability and they're being denied services. There is a right to appeal before a fair hearing officer with a right to have counsel present, as well as with respect to prioritization. If you believe that you should have priority 1, which is immediate provision of services, or you believe that you should at least have priority 2, which is a recognition that the need is there, but that there isn't a direct imminent health or safety risk attendant to the individual or to the situation, then you'll get a priority 2. If you have a no priority, and again, there are 3 levels. There's priority 1, which is the provision of immediate services based on an obvious need around health and safety. Level 2 has to do with, well, we know that there's a need there, but get in line because there are people who are much more vulnerable situation than you are. And then there's no priority, which is, in essence, you're on your own because there are other people who are perceived as having more need and who are at more risk. That concludes, and I'm going to take a deep breath because I've covered a lot of information tonight, and I hope that you'll be able to, download this PowerPoint presentation, go back and refer to it. You have my contact information. I think we have about 15 minutes left to take any questions that you may have. So I'll turn it back over.
Yeah, that was a great workshop. I've been kind of lately enlightened by the MassHealth navigators that are in Massachusetts, and working with the Autism Resource Center, Insurance Resource Center, as well as some other MassHealth navigators. And I think, in terms of dealing with MassHealth, I would almost always recommend working with a MassHealth navigator because they know the ins and outs of all of these things, and they know how to, maximize. Would you say that's accurate, or are you finding something different?
Well, no, I think that's true. I think that if you will explain the MassHealth Navigator and how people can get access to them.
Oh, okay. So there's several different ways, actually. There is one on the MassHealth website, and it says, get a navigator. It's just you click on the icon. There's also some private agencies that do it. We had that's from the Boston Mayor, Healthcare Network, and it was awesome because I could just refer people to her, and she would take care of them. And then also, the Amy Weinstock of the Autism Resource Center is great because they actually have people in different departments. Excuse me. So if you're getting in trouble with not getting something or not understanding how to navigate, they can help, make that system go for you. So it's just been, I think, a great resource for families because it's a whole other language.
It sure is. It sure is. Yeah. There's also the Premium Assistance Program. Have you had experience with that?
Yes, I have. And, I always say that's help. That's secret that people don't tell people about premium assistance. But,
So when you're working with a MassHealth, in essence, what the premium assistance program is that if you meet the income and asset qualifications. Remember, MassHealth is a welfare-based program. So the waiver program through DDS and MassHealth, you still need to meet that $2,000, asset limitation for MassHealth standard to continue to be eligible, even as a DAC or as a pickle case, even after you get onto DI. But the premium assistance is that the concept is that Medicaid wants to incentivize families to continue to maintain the private health insurance, and in return for doing that, if you demonstrate a need, they will basically pay for the premium. And you're absolutely right; it is a well-kept secret, and I don't know why that is, but I think when people start working with a MassHealth navigator and start, getting into the system, they should certainly start asking those questions about how can I get my premium funded? If one looks at the SSI program at age 18, you look at, let's say that you're averaging about $700 a month in SSI premium. Remember that asset limitation of $2,000 continues. So there needs to be a rental agreement or payment to the parents by the second or third week of the month so that the SSI representative payee account doesn't go over $2,000. So there's a general rule that when SSI comes in during the month, it's considered income. And so you need to spend that down by way of a rental obligation to the parent or reimbursement for expenses, because if you continue to have that money that comes in on the month it receives, on the following month, Social Security will consider that now an asset. So you really need to thinking about that, those representative payee accounts, almost as liquidation accounts, so they basically are flushing through to pay for housing and paying for support needs in the home. So that would be $700 a month that folks are not getting now before their son or daughter is at 18. So 700 approximately times 12 is $8,400. That is more money coming in. And then if one is inclined to look at the AFC program, the AFC program can range anywhere from $14,000 to $18,000, and that's tax-free. So there's no, government isn't telling you come and apply for these benefits, right? That you have to really be proactive and seek them out. But if you can qualify for them, there is a tangible economic benefit to the family to seeking out these benefits. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but in the thousands of families I've worked with over the last 30 years, many have opted, not to go for that promotion or to change jobs because they need to be home. They need to be part-time care providers for their son or daughter with a disability, and so you actually have taken an income hit over time, and so this is an opportunity to maybe, not catch up, but at least, have some amount of partial compensation for all of the out-of-pocket expenses and the missed economic opportunity, many people giving up careers in order to care for a son or daughter with a significant disability. So I don't think people should be shy about these programs. Also, with respect to the AFC, families say, well, if I can't be the guardian, I really don't want to do AFC. What we often do is if it's a two-parent household, one person can be the AFC provider, and the other person can be the guardian. And if the AFC provider is going to the doctors or going to a health care provider, we have a form that we've used that the guardian can sign, giving the AFC provider's parent decision-making ability and HIPAA access to health care information. So that's a situation that has worked out well. In cases where there's a single family, we can also look at an adult sibling, perhaps, who can serve as either the AFC provider or the guardian in order to maximize the AFC benefit.
All right, terrific. We do have a couple questions. My son is on DAC and SSDI. Is there any asset limit for his bank accounts? And two, will he remain eligible for AFC after it transitions to Medicare as no primary insurance? And will we lose MassHealth premium assistance when he transitions to Medicare?
Wow, that's a great question. That's complicated. So let's peel away the onion a little bit. And I'm not sure I can be as succinct as I need to. But the SSDI and the DAC benefit are not welfare programs. So theoretically, you can have as much money as you can imagine and still be on SSDI and disabled adult child benefits. Also, Medicare is a non-welfare-based program, so Medicare will continue as well. So there are no asset limitations. So we have these programs, SSDI, DAC, and Medicare. We're okay with having more than $2,000. Now we move to the Medicaid program, say, okay, what Medicaid program is he getting? And you mentioned AFC. Well, AFC is a Medicaid program that has a $2,000 asset limitation. So you can't go over the $2,000. So you're going to be looking at either those 1396P D exceptions, pooled income trust, ABLE Act when they finally come available in Massachusetts, or a self-settled trust. And so that's where the excess assets over $2,000 would have to be placed into those. Okay. And I hope that answered that person's question.
Okay. So we're in the process where my sister's priority one for housing, but there is nothing available near any of us. We are looking into getting PDP or agency of choice to be able to collect the funding and set up a shared living on our own. Could you talk a little bit about PDP and agency with choice?
Yeah, so there are three ways that one can obtain residential support through the Department of Developmental Services. One is the traditional way, which is, you wait for an opening, you wait for a slot, and you go in. PDP is a person-centered planning, or personally, it's individually driven. I'm sorry if I'm not up on all of the lingo, but it's person-directed planning, I believe, and that allows you to essentially, basically be on the hook for everything, right? You're the employer. You hire and fire people, and then the agency of choice that some of the backroom functions are handled through a service provider. It's not uncommon to hear that priority one, you still can't get it. I mean, you can't find a placement. Every situation is really complex. Every situation is unique, and so in the situations where we've worked or I've worked on behalf of families, it really involves a team. The family has to, be able to identify an agency or a service provider that they're comfortable with. They have to understand exactly what is going to be required to keep the individual, served well. And I think that as many things that they can do to get the plan in place. I'm a huge fan of, and I hate to be feeling like I'm marketing for the ARC, but I'm a really huge fan for support brokers. I think support brokers has the ability to provide expertise from individuals who get it, who have been involved in the process, and who are not subjectively or emotionally involved, and who have been through multiple planning activities, multiple housing opportunities being developed. And it's really worth getting a person, someone, we talk about Navigator, right? Navigator and MassHealth, what do? They help you navigate through the maze of what the MassHealth programs are. Well, the support brokers, have that ability. They have a sense, they have the experience of working with, TIL, working with Bay Cove or working with Seven Hills or working with Nonotuck or any number of these adult service agencies, they actually know the clinical expertise. Some would say, well, the May Institute is good at X, Kennedy Donovan is good at Y, Advocates is good at Z, and they can help identify areas of core competencies within these agencies. So the Support Brokers program, I think, can be accessed through the ARC, through the main number, and it's well worth the investment. In my special needs practice, when we're developing a special needs plan, I can't tell you how many times families I've made the recommendations and they've come back, and really has proven to be a great breakthrough. Because sometimes families might get into, we get into these emotional things, right? It's sort of a closed-ended circle of conversation, and it's good to bring some expertise out from the family and people who have an area of expertise in having done this before. Is that helpful?
Okay. Yes, thanks, Fred. One more question. I am currently on SSDI and receiving income from my part-time job that reaches the limit. Am I able to donate any funds that go over without being legally penalized?
No, you can't. What I'd be recommending you do is, get back on the slide where I identified the substantial gainful activity amount. So if you have a disability but you're not blind, your substantial gainful activity amount is $1,130. I would try to cap out at $950 or $1,000 a month of earned income, and because it's not a question of what you have in the bank, it's really a question of what's your earning capacity. And so they're really looking at what you can earn, and if you're earning $1,200 or $1,300, even though it's a modest amount of money over that monthly amount, you're at risk of being considered non-disabled, and then you'll be, you'll lose the lifeline benefits, the federal lifeline benefits, and it's unfortunate. I really think that the system is flawed in many ways. The federal disability policy is based on to demonstrate, disability, and people should be able to work and be as self-sufficient as possible and not have these artificial limits. But it's a complex system, right? And it's political, and so this is the system that we have to work on. I wish I had better advice for you, but you can't give away and say, well, I didn't really earn it. It is what it is.
Okay. Any other questions? We've got a couple minutes left. I think I'll just wait a minute. Well, thank you all for attending tonight. It was a great webinar. I always so enjoy listening to you and learning every time I do. So we'll be sending you Fred's PowerPoint, and then we'll also be, you'll be rerouted to a survey at the end of this webinar session, and we hope that you fill it out because we'd love your feedback and comments and that sort of thing. So
could I make just one observation? The PowerPoint presentation that we had was not the final revision.
Okay,
so there
I'll
are
find those.
Yeah, and just maybe if we can send that one out, that would be great.
Okay, I will. I'm not sure what happened to that one. So anyway,
it was probably my fault. I sent it late this afternoon, and probably wasn't. It just didn't get there in time.
Okay, all righty. Okay, well, everybody have a great evening, and thanks again, Fred.